The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the fourth day already of this 7-day sesshin. We are now more than halfway through the sesshin. If this gives you pause, that's a good sign, because it sounds like you're working and you're intent on your practice. If you think, oh my God, no, 3 more days, then it's time to get to work. So this is October 2023, the first of our double sesshin in Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico. At the end of this sesshin, we have 1 week, and then we begin the next sesshin. This is a very, very dynamic way to deepen the practice quite rapidly. This was the practice at Sogenji, but only for 1 sesshin, and that was the, there were three sesshins in the late fall. One was the November Ozashin at the end of November, and then there were 3 or 4 days between that and Rohatsu, which is an 8-day sesshin. And then there was about 6 days between that and what they call the second December Ozashin. So 3 in a row. Just enough time to get a little bit of rest, although the schedule was such that you really had to jump to get any rest. And when I first was at Sogenji and heard about this, it sounded quite daunting. But when I experienced it, it was amazing, absolutely amazing, because so little time between sesshin, you don't have time to come down to where you would if you were waiting for another sesshin much later. And then to do another one after that, your practice could jump deeper and deeper and deeper. It was dynamite. And to do that every year, plus at Sogenji, there were rare moments when it was a, quote, ordinary day. Most of the time we were in sesshin. We were either in Ozashin, where the schedule was similar to Mountain Gate, or we were in Kozashin, where it was like ko means small, small sesshin, where we sat the same, let me think, 4 o'clock a.m. to 7:30, 3.5 hours every morning of every day in the month, except for the free day after each of these sesshin. So there are 3 free days after the sesshin, but in between, every morning we had sanzen. Every morning we sat for 3.5 hours. And then during Kozashin, we did the usual 3.5 hour sit in the morning. And then we did the morning work, had lunch, and very soon after that, we would go back into the zendo for more zazen. So we would end up getting 8 or 9 hours of zazen, even though it wasn't a regular sesshin every day. And there was sanzen morning and evening. It was a very intensive way to train, very effective way to train, and just incredible, just incredible. Here, because people have jobs, it's not possible really to do that. But once in a while, someone will be able to make their schedule work so that they can come to 2 in a row sesshin. And that proves to be extremely helpful. Flora Courtois was an American woman. She was born, I'm not quite sure exactly when she was born, but she started college at the University of Michigan the year before the market crashed. She was an only child. Her father her was quite wealthy, and so she went to University of Michigan. Early in her life, as a teenager, as a young teenager, she had begun to wonder if there is an underlying truth that is always true. She began to collect aphorisms, had a little scrapbook that she pasted them in, and she began to realize that every time she experienced something, she'd run to her book and try to find the right aphorism, and discover that once the experience was over, the event was done, the aphorism no longer fit. And so that's what triggered her wondering if there wasn't an underlying truth that was always true. Then I think when she was 15 or 16, she had some form of minor surgery, at which point she was anesthetized. And this was in those days with ether, and they place a cone over your face, over your nose, and you breathe in the ether. And as she began to sink into unconsciousness, she had this sense that if she went deeply enough, she would reach something most precious. Only what happened was she went unconscious before that could be reached. But it set something in her mind that caused an ongoing increase in this search for what there was that was always true. When she went to college, she was really, really caught in this question. She was raised Roman Catholic, and so she went to the local parish priest, who was apparently quite a powerful, a popular young man, and asked the question, is there a deep truth beneath everything that's always true? He gave her a stack of books on dogma to read. She recognized that this was not going to give her her answers, but she read them anyway. And then she started taking different courses in university where she hoped there might be some insight. And at one point she was in a lecture by a visiting professor from England, I think it was. And she was sitting quite in front of the lectern, and still deeply, deeply caught in this question. What is reality? Is there something that is real beneath everything? And she had a sudden insight that must have brought a look on her face that caused the lecturer to stop his lecture mid-sentence and look at her, see if she was okay. But she began to have little insights, and she also began to have some, what she called visions. One of them was that she was part of an ancient cave-dwelling family, and at a certain point, the family decided to look outside the cave and see what it was looking like. And so they ventured out, and she was just amazed at this vast plain of light. And to her dismay, the rest of the family got frightened and went back inside. And that is a metaphor for something that can happen as we get close to some form of awakening. We begin to go beyond our usual assumptions about life, our usual habit patterns. We begin to step out of our usual framework of assuming life, that framework that is born of the self-image. And it can be frightening, because suddenly you're out there naked. And she recognized that there was something really important in this experience. And then she had another vision in which she was working in an office, a gray office building, in a little cubicle at a gray desk, manipulating colored blocks. And without seeing them, she knew that there were other people in that building doing similar work. Every once in a while, they would go out into the hallways and converse, and then go back into the rooms and continue their work. And one day, without knowing why, she turned around, and it turned out there was this vast, big window behind her. She had somehow never noticed. And not only that, but it was big enough she could walk out of the window, out through the window. She could see this amazing scene outside. Here she was, looking at this gray desk, gray walls, playing with these little colored blocks. Turned around, walked out of the cubicle, and found herself in this amazing vista of light, a meadow, butterflies flitting around, flowers, gentle breeze, a river in the distance, mountains in the distance beyond that. And it was just simply breathtaking. She was so excited, she wanted to share this view with her fellow workers. So she went back into the window, into her room, and as suddenly she did that, she found she had no words for that experience. And that inspired her as well. There was something amazing, something marvelous, something so worth opening to. And she kept searching within. The market crashed. She almost couldn't go back to school at that point. Apparently her father had lost some money, but she managed to get some form of scholarship plus to live with a family in exchange for doing some light housework and babysitting. And she found that it took her hours to do a simple load of ironing, because she was so engrossed in this inner search for something she couldn't name, but knew was so important to return to. And in fact, it began to be noticed that she was quite distracted, and she was referred to the university health clinic, where she was interviewed by a therapist, and he decided it was just normal and that there was nothing wrong with her. She wasn't getting psychotic or anything. So they decided she was overworked. So somewhere they found a fund that allowed her to live elsewhere, I think on campus, and to simply go to the food hall and eat without having to pay anything. And then one day at home, I think it was Thanksgiving vacation that year, she was sitting on her bed in her room. She glanced at the little green desk in her room, and suddenly, as she put it, the world changed on its axis. She ran to the bathroom and looked in the mirror and saw this absolutely mirthful look on her face. And when she went back to school, she found that she had a different view of things, that She had originally been set to go for a PhD in psychology, and she decided to go for a master's instead. She would find that she would go to classes, then run back to where she was staying, have a quick nap, and emerge bright and cheerful again to continue life, and that things just changed for her. It's as if the friction in life had disappeared. Things went seamlessly. And she did graduate with a master's, eventually got married, moved to Southern California, and had a son. And she had always wondered what it was that happened. She tried to investigate it, assuming there was some change in her eyesight, and discovered there was no real basis for that. And she finally quit asking about it because it was clear to her that nobody knew what was going on, what had gone on for her. And she vowed never to speak of it again until she met someone who had enough insight to know what was going on. So there she was in Southern California. Mayuzumi, who was not yet Roshi, was there, had just started a little sitting group in the basement of a church. But before that, she was in a living room gathering where they discussed Zazen and enlightenment. And she discovered that what they were talking about when they described enlightenment was what had happened to her. And so she started sitting with Mayuzumi, and actually eventually continued all the way through her training with him, through all the koan collections, and he actually had asked her to teach. She declined. But at one point, she was quite a bit older than the usual folks. I think she was by then in her late 30s, early 40s. He would sometimes call her in when there were parents who had come to investigate what their kids were involved in. Because back then, Zen was quite suspect. It was considered a cult. There were people who made a living reprogramming people. In fact, I know a woman who was for a while one of the co-abbots of the San Francisco Zen Center, who actually had a Kensho experience, but not through meditation. She had it before she ever got into Zen. She got hit by a car and sent flying through the air with a dead aim at a telephone pole. She thought to herself, I'm going to die. She hit the telephone pole, lost consciousness, and when she awoke, she found that it was kind of disconcerting, because what she had realized somehow in the process was not how she had been living and thinking. She was a twin. She was from New York City, and her twin sister got in touch with her and said, you better be careful because Mom is worried about you, and she's hiring a deprogrammer to work with you. And so what this woman did was fly back to New York City and talk to her mother about what had happened and suggest that they go and visit a psychiatrist. And they did. And the psychiatrist said, there's nothing wrong with your daughter, madam, but I think you could benefit from therapy. So it can come in various different ways, but for Flora, it came as a result of deep, deep, ongoing absorption in question. At one point, well, at many points, when Mayuzumi-roshi was accosted by concerned parents, he would call her over to have tea with them, and she would come in her high heels and her white gloves and sit and chat pleasantly with these people about her own life and so on. So they could see she was normal. And then one day he asked her to drive to San Francisco and bring down a Zen monk, a couple of Zen monks. Turns out that one of them was Mitra-roshi. And so she decided, with Miyazumi's translation, that she would describe what had happened to her and ask him about it. It's the first time she ever would mention it to anyone. So she did, and Mitra-roshi said that he could see that awakening experience had been quite deep, and it was still there. She was still living it, even 20, 30 years later, which attests to how deep it was, actually, because she went for something like 20 years without any knowledge of Zazen, and it wasn't until then that she started practicing. And that is one of the things that is necessary when one has a Kensho experience, is to continue working to deepen it. I know people who have had Kensho experiences and then just quite satisfied, just quit doing Zazen. And after a year, they came back because it had faded. It wasn't alive for them anymore. He also asked her to write about it. And so she did. It was titled An Experience of Enlightenment. It was originally published by Quest Books. And the reason I got to know Flora personally and visit her a number of times was that it went out of print. And so the Rochester Zen Center offered to reprint it. And so we began a conversation, and she invited me out. And it turns out that Robert Aiken had also had the same concern and had spoken with a publisher who looked around and said there are still copies on bookstore shelves. So we won't do anything until that's done, till there's nothing more. So nothing got done with it until after she died of pneumonia in her early 70s. She had pretty bad asthma. And she willed the story, the rights to the story, to ZCLA, Zen Center Los Angeles. And they sat on it for several years, and then they republished it as an extra 2 chapters, ending chapters in a book of Miyazumi's teachings called Hazy Moon of Enlightenment. So if you want the whole detailed story, you can try to find the latest edition of Hazy Moon of Enlightenment, because it's not in the earlier editions. And there you can read her story. She was an ordinary human being, a regular American, and without anything but this deep curiosity, this need to know, she came to a deep awakening experience that was still alive for her decades later when she expressed it to Mitra-roshi. And as I said, she continued to do the koan training all the way through the koans offered by Miyazumi Roshi, and turned down his request that she start teaching. She was a lovely human being. Very kind, very clear, very present, and it was quite a privilege to get to know her. The last time I saw her, she said to me, "You know, I've started questioning again." I never got a chance to ask her exactly what, because she died some months later. But I'm sure her dying was quite peaceful. She wrote a piece for Parabola magazine. I don't think Parabola is still being published anymore, but this was in a 1990 issue. This is what she wrote. At the heart of Zen practice, there is a kind of radical intimacy, intimate attention. This absolute first-hand quality of experience characterizes the beginning of our lives, and if we are not drugged, the end. No other, quote unquote, mediates between us and the experience, the intimacy, aloneness of birth, and no memories, no thoughts, no plans invade this pure innermost innerness with their shadowing images. So too, in the spare simplicity of deaths, here attention is really is reality, and reality attention. Sorry, I can't see very well, so I'm sort of stumbling over this. But in the days and years of our living, somehow we lose touch with this clarity and think to possess ourselves in images. In so doing, we fall into a bad case of mistaken identity. We think our living instead of living our life. And we live at second and third and fourth hand. Yet, the opportunity to be restored to our ongoing, unbound, divine condition is always immediately at hand. That's something to really ponder. Always immediately at hand. When we come into Zen practice, we assume it's somewhere out there, somewhere, unreachable and mysterious. And we have questions about whether we actually can reach it, and we can get discouraged. And so faith and determination are really, really important in Zen practice. You have to persist, and persist even in the face of boredom, in the face of fear, in the face of frustration, in the face of just a blurry mind, and keep reaching for that, you don't know what, somewhere, because it is invaluable to return to it. And the more attention you can pay to everything you do, including your mind state, will make all the difference in the world to reach it. She calls it a doorway to infinity. And it's available to each one of us. And not only that, but there's no specific moment at which it might appear. It could suddenly be there, right before us, in breathtaking reality, because we forget ourselves for a moment in the search. And then to continue deepening, continue opening with presence and attention and awareness. This is absolutely vital. When you look at a small child, or even Boo, for example, they are focused on whatever it is they're seeing, and they don't have thoughts about it. They're just exploring it without thought, from a deeper place within. Boo can be snoozing on the deck, and suddenly he's awake and aware. And his face, his head is pointed in the direction of where there's a sense of danger or some sense of something out there. He has this amazing ability to be totally relaxed and yet in seconds, less than seconds, totally awake and totally focused. If you saw him at the woodpile this morning or yesterday, you know he can be so focused. And basically that's what he is. He's never not focused. And when we live our lives that way, everything is rich, fulfilling, and quite amazing. Moreover, as Mitra-roshi said, when he had a deep Kensho experience after several years in the monastery, many sesshin, and then a year in the forest, sitting with deep concentration. One day on a weekend, some other folks came up the path near where he was sitting, and they glanced at him and said, are you a Zen monk? And he said, yes. And they said, you're so fortunate. You get to do meditation all day long, every day. We can only come up one day a week because that's the only day we have away from work. And at that point, somehow that triggered Mitra-roshi's awakening, and he suddenly realized all he had to do in life was simply to receive. Simply to receive. No ideas about it, no concerns about it, just simply to receive with open hands. And that is exactly what we all are called upon to do. The way we think when we're not paying attention enough is to think, we see something, we think about it, and that generates another thought about something related or unrelated, and off we go in a train of thoughts. In the meantime, life goes by. But we also have a narrow view of what we're willing to see and accept and do, and that causes us some challenges. We're particularly concerned about not feeling bad. We don't want to hurt. We don't want to feel anything unpleasant. We want to feel everything really nice and comfortable. And then we get concerned and possibly upset when that pleasant feeling disappears on us. So this is what he meant. It doesn't matter what the mind state. It doesn't matter what the occasion. Just simply receive it without any preconceived notions about it, without any judgments about it. And when you do that, your mind is free to respond to the situation in extremely helpful ways that always work. You've already heard the story of when he was one of the head monks at Shofukuji in Kobe, Japan. He'd been training for some years there already, quite a few years, in order to become a head monk. And he was leading a work party outside the inner gates of the temple, and still on temple grounds. And there was a group of homeless people living there. Japan has such narrow strictures on behavior, and people who cannot work with that, don't fit that, end up sort of being outside of society, and that's usually who ends up homeless in Japan. Here and there are people with mental health issues, but it's people who don't really fit into the form that is expected of people in Japan. The society is quite rigid in that sense. So they decided that they had been cheated out of water by the temple. And so their leader, who was a man who was no stranger to violence, as he was described by someone who told me about the incident, who had been there, came up and was screaming at Dosan, as they called him back then, right in his face, irate, red in the face, furious, to the point where my friend, who was holding a shovel at the time, decided he'd hang on to the shovel in case he needed to whack the guy if he took a punch at Dosan. And what Dosan did, as you already know, was look him in the eye with kindness and recognition and honor, not with challenge. It's possible to look somebody in the eye in a challenging look, and that will only escalate things. But he was looking at this person with a sense of honor and interest. He wanted to hear what the guy had to say. And gradually he became more and more inwardly quiet. And that communicated to the irate man, and he too began to calm down and become more quiet inside. And then they were able to speak, and whatever was said, he was satisfied, and he went away. So it was a situation where there could have been bloodshed, and great distress. But Mitra-roshi simply received him, not judging, just open to what he had to say, what was his concern, and got deeply quiet, not feeling it necessary at all to rebut or to argue. And it de-escalated everything quite readily. And I'd like to share one last thing. True freedom of mind is something we can discover for ourselves through the practice of meditation. Tibetan Buddhism, the most direct and powerful way to experience this inner freedom is by exploring the nature of awareness, which is exactly what we're doing as we're extending the out-breath. We are open to the experience of the awareness of breathing out, and with an openness to a possibility that something will be revealed to us as part of that process. To experience this inner freedom is by exploring the nature of awareness, a journey that puts us in touch with a source of equanimity, wisdom, and compassion that we can access anytime and anywhere. And that was from Mingyur Rinpoche's website. Mingyur Rinpoche is a contemporary Tibetan Buddhist teacher who has written a number of books because he, as a child, was plagued by such feelings of terror that he would have panic attacks. And he started doing meditation at age 6 because his father was a teacher, and continued and ended up in one of the 3-month, 3-day retreats that is typical of of Tibetan Buddhism. And at a certain point, he was tired of having these panic attacks. He was 13 years old at that point. And so he decided to go into his room and stay there and deal with this panic until it was gone. So he tuned in to the felt sense, how it felt in his body, not his thoughts about it, but how it felt in his body. And after 3 days, it was gone, and it never happened again. He is quite an amazing teacher, and at a certain point decided he wanted to go on a pilgrimage all by himself, which was not as easy done as said, because he had been recognized as a tulku. A tulku is someone recognized reincarnation of a previous master. And as such, he always had an attendant, and the attendant took care of all the details and even ordered his food for him. At one point, there was some kind of document that was needed. So his mother and he and the attendant went to the government offices, and he was he was sat down in a restaurant, food was ordered for him, and his mother and the attendant left to go to the government offices. At a certain point, he got bored, and so he went over to the offices himself, which, much to the dismay of his mother and the attendant, and they chastised him for that. And what he said about that incident was, "I wasn't 7 years old, I was 17. So that's the constrictions he had on his life. So he had to do a lot of planning and sneak out. He actually managed to get a key made for the gate to the compound he was living in so that he could unlock it right after the night watchman came and locked it again, checked the lock, and then he could lock it up again. And then he sort of hid in the bushes. He had ordered a taxi and went to the train station where he faced himself. He had always, whenever he traveled, the tickets were bought by his attendant, and he was escorted upstairs to the elite lounge where there were things were clean and neat, and people were clean and well dressed. And instead, there he was down with the local populace who didn't necessarily have access to bathing facilities and would just sit on the floor of the train station and go to sleep there. He couldn't handle that. That was a little bit too much for him, and he had a little bit of money saved, and so he was able to go and there are places where you can pay a nominal fee and actually get a bed in the train station. And so he did that for 3 nights. And then the train came, and of course he was not in the elite car. He was in with the poorest of people in the cheapest car, where they sat on benches, crowded in. And he'd never been crowded before in his life. It was quite an extreme experience for him. He had a wonderful opportunity to face a lot of challenges in his life. At any rate, he wrote a book about it. But what is most impressive is that he did get to, I think it was Varanasi, and do zazen in a park. And by that time, he'd run out of money. And so he was having to go to the back door of restaurants where he had originally eaten, and then welcomed in the front door and sat at a table and chair and paid for his food. When he ran out of money, he had just to go to back door and beg. And at some point, he got some food that was tainted, and so he got sick, quite sick. And he was in the park doing meditation, ran out of water, had both diarrhea and throwing up, and was gradually losing consciousness, and recognized that he actually was dying. And I won't go further with this, but it is well worth reading. It's called In Love with the World, a monk's travel through the bardos of what is it? Living and Dying. And I would recommend that book because it speaks volumes about life, death, expectations, and how he was meeting death. He realized that the only thing he regretted about dying was that he wouldn't see his mom again. He was the youngest of a number of brothers, all of whom ended up being Tulkus, by the way. All of them ended up teaching as his father had been teaching. His father was a deeply, deeply realized monk, teacher, Urgyen Rinpoche. So there's a lot of resources through which to be motivated to find this door to infinity and walk through it, to become awakened. But the most important thing, as Flora Courtois emphasized, was attention and awareness. And this is actually not, we say pay attention, and people say, yeah, okay. But in the meantime, there's a stream of thoughts running through our heads. We're distracted by this, and that, and so on. And so we sort of half pay attention to whatever we're paying attention to. This is about much more complete attention than that. And we often have to train our minds to get there, because when we were small children, it came naturally. But then through education, through experiences, particularly through difficult or painful experiences, we started imploding and developing a shell around us, and also developing a self-image that drives our behavior, our expectations, our assumptions. We can become free of all this. And that freedom is beyond anything that can be described. To taste that freedom is why when you read enlightenment stories, you read that people are overjoyed, and some of them get up and dance around, and their lives are changed because of that. I have to add that that's not the end. You have to also continue to deepen that experience, continue to open more awareness and attention, and continue searching wordlessly within, because it continues to grow deeper and deeper, and the freedom also grows more vast, and your ability to deal with difficult circumstances is amazing, free, and results in no friction. And no matter how it comes out, there's a profound acceptance, which changes our life, and it also changes others. So This is our Zen practice. This is our potential. And I think that's long enough. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows. We already have gone way over. Thank you for your patience.